Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.
Welcome to Living the Solution with Dr. Elena George. Today we have a very important show on, one I'm very much looking forward to, because we're living in very interesting times where things, in my opinion, seem to be going under the radar. We're very focused on the next big thing, the next shiny thing, and it's big because our future is in the hands of, I don't think it's fate. I think God's always in control, but we're not sure how this is going to roll out. So things are happening. Life is moving on. And one of the things I've been reading about is about the digital dollar and digital currency. And I had to learn about it in the past, Bitcoin and that sort of thing, but I really haven't been paying attention to it. But potentially this could become the replacement for the dollar. And what would that mean for us as individuals, as free thinkers, as individuals who want to run our own lives, and for our government for that matter? So I wanted to have somebody who could speak to that come on today. His name is Mr. James Gorrie, and he writes for the Epoch Times. He has a blog, thebananarepublican.com, and he's also an author. And one of the things that I think he's also well up on what we need to be on in terms of China, he's the author of The China Crisis, and people need to go and get that book because it's important to understand where we are and what we're dealing with and stop putting our heads in the sand. So, Mr. Gorrie, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, my pleasure, Dr. George. Great to be here and look forward to a very engaging conversation about the digital dollar and other topics, of course.
Well, one of the things that strikes me about your writing and just your personality comes through very strongly. And you're not afraid of controversy, of speaking truth to power, which I think is one of the most important things that we have. Everybody needs to develop that skill. And this article that you wrote, and it's in the Epoch Times for folks to read. They need to go to theepochtimes.com and they can find this. But you really talk about a lot of things that are dovetailing. The election disruption, what's the next big disruption going to be? And I think it's interesting that people hear your voice. So what got you interested in this? It's an interesting topic.
Well, thank you. Yeah, the digital currency is really, it's an amazing development, not just financially, but technologically. Digital currencies or cryptocurrencies, as they're called, is a product of what's called blockchain. And blockchain, also known as distributed ledger technology. Not to get too technical, but it's basically a way to be anonymous, to be rapid, and to be widespread, and to transact or engage in the transfer of all kinds of information in an anonymous and secure way, which really hasn't been, and economically too. So that it solves a lot of issues that have, plagued. If you've ever tried to wire money overseas, for example, or things like that, there's all kinds of hoops to go through and regulations, different, from cross-border regulations and so forth. So, just a little brief background on what it is. The first was Bitcoin, and that came out of the central bank caused 2008, 2009 financial crisis, global financial crisis. And there's a lot of reasons for that we won't cover today, but the technology was there, or at least was being developed to kind of provide an antidote, a counter to relying on centrally controlled currencies that are manipulated, inflated, deflated, with interest rates applied to it in different ways and so forth, that really tend to disrupt or distort economies wholesale across the world. So digital currency was a way for people to become independent, anonymous, and control their destiny in terms of currency and what they did, and without having anyone know what they did. That was kind of the gist of the thing, the motivation behind it. The internet was obviously in full force by then, and Now, the distributed ledger technology, or the blockchain, is that technology that allows those transfers of information and data and so forth. And the currency itself was created in its digital cash. Not cash you hold in your hand, but you can use it. And Bitcoin was the first one, and so it's gone a long way from there. And that brings us to the digital dollar, kind of. But yeah, that's what it was born out of.
Well, I have a quick question about that. Because I'm a devil's advocate, what's the difference between that and bartering? Where's the value? What's the underpinning value? Like, is it gold based? What is it based on?
That's a very good question. So you have to, in terms of currency, in terms of Bitcoin rather, it had to be mined, and that was like the way you mine gold is the analogy there. But rather than mining gold, computers, people had to solve complex algorithms using their computers and spending time. So there's kind of a time value of money applied to that, and whether or not the algorithms were for something legitimate, valid, or not, there is that kind of time value effort for value.
Okay.
As far as barter, it's not barter. Is whatever you and I consider valuable. I mean, in prisons, it's cigarettes, for example, or chocolate, right? So, I went to basketball. Well, that basketball costs you either 4 cigarettes or a chocolate bar or whatever. So people want them, or whatever it's been throughout history. People have used something to carry value, to represent value, and may have its own intrinsic value. So the Bitcoin relies on buyers and sellers to both accept Bitcoin.
Okay.
And that appeals to all kinds of people, private business owners, but also kind of the darker side of life, if you will, the underworld, the smugglers, and those types of things, that the drug dealers and all that. There's that too. So it's not all great. There are, like anything else in life, there's downsides to it. But as long as two parties believe in the value, accept it as a valid currency, then you're in business.
But what's really exciting about it is that it's individual based, right? It's decentralized, another way to put it, as opposed to the Fed or a centralized bank running the show. And as you said before, basically making up the value as they go along, right? It's fiat. It's not based on anything. It's what they say it is. And this is a disconnection from that. Is that a way to see that?
That's precisely one of the motivating factors behind this development. Was we don't want to be manipulated and controlled. So the cryptocurrencies, crypto meaning hidden, obviously, and digital meaning the means of exchange through the internet, and it allows that anonymity and allows that individual control. And people have continued to do a lot of business. Houses are being bought and sold. Companies are being bought and sold with Bitcoin. And now Bitcoin has had its own kind of, it's not immune from fluctuations in value. And a lot of value obviously is based on perception. Mm-hmm. But, in late 2017, probably 3 years ago, thereabouts, it was almost $20,000 a coin. Like 19,000 and something, 500, 800, whatever it was. And 3 years later, it's back up to about 18,000 and whatever it might be. At least it was yesterday. I haven't checked today. So that's a lot of fluctuation. In the meantime, it dropped to 4,000 or 5,000, I think, in the interim. So you still have that fluctuation. You have to ask yourself why that is. There's probably a lot of reasons for that. Part of it is being talked down by the establishment. Part of it's hype. Part of it is people being caught or exchanges being raided where Bitcoin is being stolen. Millions and millions of dollars of Bitcoin or Bitcash or other cryptocurrencies are being taken illegally. So there's a lot of reasons for that value fluctuation. And Bitcoin was and still is a very, very important development, but and blockchain itself is a very important part of that. And there have been improvements, and there have been kind of, first movers. You catch all the arrows, right? You get the best view, but you also catch all your mistakes, and you pay for your mistakes and so forth. So the agility and the some of the best advantages were also kind of bogged down by too much not enough bandwidth and too much demand. So transactions would take more time, up to a day or two, and which should be taking a couple seconds to a couple days. And there's some other iterations that go probably beyond the scope of this conversation in terms of, forks in a currency where, another currency is spun off of that one. And there are other platforms that are used, which is unnecessary to go in here. But basically there's thousands of currencies. And even that term currency is probably over elastic, because when you use a blockchain technology, you can do things safely. For example, you have a laptop or you have a desktop. You probably have excess computing power, and I do the same, and probably everybody we know does the same. So that computing power is laying fallow. It's being unused. It's not being exploited. Well, there's a cryptocurrency that allows somebody else to borrow or use our computing power and pay us, and we don't know the difference. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's a tremendous amount of potential. Ironically, or probably not so ironically, is the fact that the digital dollar strips away most of the original advantages that Bitcoin sought to provide.
Well, let's take our first break, because I want to actually discuss digital dollar now that we understand the whole premise behind Bitcoin and freedom. On that note, let's take our first break. You're living in the solution. Welcome back to Living in Solution. We're speaking with Mr. James Gorrie, the author of The China Crisis, and he has a website, thebananarepublican.com. Before the break, you were doing a great job of breaking down why Bitcoin became so important and I would say popular. And makes me question now, the digital dollar is by definition more of a centralized instrument, isn't it? It's a government making a digital monetary instrument. Is it to compete with Bitcoin? Is it to take it out of circulation? Is it to have ultimate control?
The last two. It doesn't want to compete with Bitcoin, in my opinion, because central banks don't like competition. So
that's really true.
They don't want to compete with anybody, right? Mm-hmm. So whereas Bitcoin provided anonymity with anonymous validation of transactions and a unbroken, uncorruptible string of transactions, a back history, if you would. The digital dollar kind of does away with all that. And there's a reason why. The feds, central banks all over. I mean, there's crypto ruble, crypto pound. I mean, there's tremendous amounts of crypto yuan is already out there, right? So from China. So there's a lot of reasons why. Primarily, it's, look, first they said, oh, this is not going to be real. This is not going to be last long. It's a fad. And up and down the food chain of banks, from, Citibank, Jamie Dimon, it's not really viable. It's not, we don't consider it money, all those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that they were desperately trying to create their own, and they've been trying to do that for years. And now that they have, they need Bitcoin to go away. And I think it probably will. I don't think, when you mess with a central bank's power, there's a price to be paid. I don't think that it's realistic to think that there's going to be a digital dollar. Oh, and we're going to have this competing digital currency at the same time for very long. I just don't think that would be the case unless Bitcoin and some of the other major ones were co-opted. where it's the appearance of anonymity and so forth, but there's a back door, a back channel, and so forth. Okay, so that may be the case, but central banks don't want competition. They want control, and so all that stuff, all the advantages are going away. So now you have, and the problem is that the disadvantages are much worse. For example, if you got paid in a digital dollar would require you to have an account with the Federal Reserve. They need to know who you are and what you're doing, and they may initially introduce it as a way to get the paycheck protection plan payment. Right? Which they did already. They deposited money in Bank of America or wherever, and you got your money out, right? So it could be easily kind of co-opted there. And instead of you've done this, now we're doing this. It's very similar. It's just that you have the account with the Fed. It's that much more secure, especially since Bank of America is losing tremendous amounts of government payouts to people. They're having their accounts cleared out. So the safety and security of it is kind of the argument. But really, if it continues on that thread or on that track, you may see something like, well, we're going to require, because of all the money laundering and all the other types of threats to our financial security, we're going to just move over all the accounts and harmonize all accounts and all methods of payment. Okay, and that may be a bit down the road, but I can certainly see it happening, especially in light of kind of some of the other financial concepts that are being suggested, such as universal basic income and modern monetary theory. So it would certainly help facilitate both.
That brings a chill down my spine thinking about that, because whoever has the pocketbook has the power. And if someone decides your worth, what they're going to deem to put into your account that you have to live on, what happens when you run afoul of it in some way, or they perceive that you do? I can see, if you're thinking China, social credit score and all sorts of other things to make you jump through a hoop. Is this the beginning of something like that? This grid, this economic, social grid that they're trying to create?
Well, it already feels like it in a way. Take it out of the monetary realm for a moment. You mentioned social credit. What are people we're being divided by maskers versus no maskers, pro-vaxxers versus anti-vaxxers, right? We're being divided along those lines, and it typically, not completely, but I would say generally falls along party lines. There's been several studies that talk about, the psychology of being a conservative or the psychology of being a liberal. And you have that push and pull, that tension between liberals prefer more security and conservatives prefer more liberty. And so, ironically, conservatives tend to be more risk friendly, and liberals, in a sense, tend to be more risk averse. So that kind of dovetails nicely and correlates with wear a mask versus no mask. Are you pro-vax versus are you anti-vax? So there's that kind of, it's not completely one way or the other. There's plenty of overlap, but I think generally you could make that point. So yeah, from a from a social standpoint, social credit is very much of an issue. If you don't wear a mask, you're selfish.
Yeah.
And you're putting everyone in danger. But I think if you look at places like, Sweden, South Dakota, New York City, so you have various places where there's been no lockdown and no masks, lockdown and masks, and there really hasn't been any advantage to the lockdown from a health perspective, and the mask not really either.
I agree totally. And economic perspective is even more devastating. But again,
of course,
it seems like it's picking winners and losers, where the big box corporate-driven economy is booming, and mom and pop on Main Street is getting totally hosed.
Yeah, I like that's a perfectly valid economic term. Totally host. So I think Paul Krugman might have used that term in a different context. But no, I think that you're absolutely right. And again, you can make some generalities. Look, the small businesses are the engine of the economy. Somewhere between 60 and 70% of jobs come out of small business, and more to the point, small business creation. And that means that if you're going to say, look, we're going to, in the context of health and security and safety, we're going to shut down all the small businesses to keep Walmart, CVS open, but not churches and not the nail salon down the street and restaurants and bars. Then what you're doing is you're herding, and that's a HERD, you're herding people into the pen of dependency, into the economic, corral of, you're corralling them into dependency on the government and on federal handouts. And at the same time, you're enlarging the power of, which is a definite fascist event that's unfolding. You have the marrying of big corporations with government policy, and you're destroying individualism, destroying independence, and you're enriching the big tech, which is again supporting the right, quote, or I should say the left political side, as it were, and so it becomes one hand washes the other, and the rest of us are left to not fend for ourselves, rather, but become dependent.
I couldn't have said it better. And I want to explore this further on the other side of the break, because I think people need to understand there really is a bigger picture, and we're so caught in the weeds on this, but we're all in it together, and it doesn't matter who you are, what color you are, what side of the political spectrum you're on. You need to pay attention to this, because once this comes online, I don't think it's going to go away. So on that note, let's take our second break. You're living in the solution. Welcome back to Living the Solution. We are having a really important conversation with Mr. James Gorrie about our future, quite frankly. And I don't know, I came across it wasn't an article, it was basically a research paper on something called Lockstep that's written by, I can think of the Rockefeller Foundation. And this reminds me of, we just put in little pieces of this bigger picture. We're talking economic, we're talking social credit, we're talking about now from a medical, because I'm a doctor, from the medical perspective, how COVID-19 has been used to hasten this. You can't touch money, it's dirty, so digital is the safer way to go. I mean, all sorts of stuff they come out of the crack with, but it's all for a bigger picture. And I'm just disgusted, honestly, that we're all different. We all shouldn't be wanting and doing the same things. Let's be a very boring existence, right? To being a drone. And we're so busy hating on each other, we can't see the big picture. But you mentioned something briefly, and I wanted to discuss it further. The sustainable income. I think about that as the minimum that you can have to survive. And what about if you want to go on vacation? What about if you want to buy a big house? What if you want to work hard and get ahead? It doesn't exist in that system, does it?
It doesn't appear that there's any room for that, except for the very top 1%. And you hear that in kind of, these dog whistle policies about, forcing suburban homeowners to give up by law, give up their suburban homes or make them smaller or whatever it is, where you have quote unquote diversity, economic diversity. People move to the suburbs for a reason. It gives them a place that's a little more quiet and a little safer and a little, for all the advantages. And it doesn't seem that is kind of viewed as the old term used to be bourgeois in the old clear-cut communist days, but that term you won't hear anymore. But you'll hear moralistic terms. You're selfish. You're racist. You are racist, xenophobic, homophobic, Islamophobic, and all of those terms are used to do a number of things. They're used to, as you point out quite correctly, to keep us hating on one another. race is the most basic attribute of a person. And because it's the most basic, it should be the most limited. But the left has taken a very basic attribute and elevated and inculcated it with all kinds of values that that must accompany and attach to a specific race, which is absurd on its face, and yet people buy it. And there's a reason they do. I won't go into that now, but I think it has to do with, people want to feel good about themselves. And one way of doing that is to lay blame, exclusive blame, I might add, in one camp, in one section of society, and then give them the opportunity to absolve themselves. Okay.
I would go further. I think it's not just one group. I mean, we've heard of Candace Owens, and we're, I guess, conservative Black people, and all of a sudden they're Nazis and white supremacists too. So it doesn't have really anything to do with the color of the skin. From I'm finding, it's so hypocritical they can't keep it straight. And
well, you and Candace are not aware of the fact that neither of you are Black. So you need to come to grips with that. Okay. No,
hilarious.
Of course it's absurd. Of course it's absurd. But it is socialization. It is changing the minds and the perception. And, you find that interesting. I do, at least. I think most people would. When you talk to somebody like a Candace Owens or a David Mamet, the playwright and filmmaker, and other people who were very far left, and then they became, and they kind of, it's ironically, they were blue-pilled, and now they've been red-pilled, to use that reference, and it fits. And they realize, my gosh, it's all about not thinking but feeling. I'm kind of really encapsulating the phenomena. But once you start thinking without those pretexts that kind of blind your vision and blind your perception, all of a sudden you wait a minute. Yeah, how can a Candace Owens, or how can a Dr. George, or a Larry Elder, or a Walter Williams, or a Thomas Sowell, how can they, in good conscience, be who they are and not be liberal? And those are some of the people that I admire most on the national stage. I voted for Ben Carson over Donald Trump. I figured, well, a guy doing business is one thing, but a guy doing brain surgery, you got to be cool, smart, calm, collected, and deliberate in what you do. And I thought, well, so anyway, but the point being is, yeah, you're right, of course. But that's what's happening, and that is what's destroying us, is because we're being told lies, and we're believing them. And so the dollar, the digital dollar, the other side of this coin, or another aspect to it, probably another better metaphor, another facet to it here, is that the pandemic, such as it is, has utterly debased the dollar. We're trillions of dollars more in debt today than we were 9 months ago. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's by accident. I think it's designed. So it's really a destruction of the dollar, destruction of the other major currencies around the world. And they're looking for a solution. And I think that's where that digital dollar comes into play as well. And it's not the virus, it's the response to the virus.
Exactly.
Right? We're talking about, you would know much better than I, but we're speaking to vaccines that are 95%, maybe 90%. Well, the survival rate of the virus is 99.6%.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that, because we're acting like there's no other recourse for treatment, and that it's a 99% kill rate. It's not. No. Majority of people recover with no treatment, and now you also have therapeutics. So what is the big rush to vaccinate everybody if you can take a hydroxychloroquine or Plaquenil, whatever you're going to take, vitamin D, and there's lots of ways to treat this, especially early, which no one ever wants to talk about. So I'm always dubious when you look for the most complicated answer when there's something simple that is less toxic, that something about. It was amazing how they went off on hydroxychloroquine when it's given over the counter in certain countries because of malaria. So people really do need to do their research. And I would get your take on this. This whole United States election is a disaster, but I think it's bringing some truths to the forefront. We've been hoodwinked for a very long time on how those machines work, how people we put in power treat us and think about us. I'm just done with the next politician telling me I need to stay home in my dark hole, house while they're having lunch and dinner and enjoying themselves and getting on planes to Hawaii. I really have a problem with that. How come it's not good enough for you if you make the pronouncement or the law? People learning that.
Yeah, in a way, they're doing a lot of us a favor because they're showing what hypocrites they are. Mm-hmm. And look, it's interesting. The same thought process is the same mindset that says, look, we're not going to allow or we're going to ridicule hydroxychloroquine or some of the other remedies because it's not science. Well, it's old and this is a new virus. Well, that's not really the case. The science is there. The French were using it 6 months ago and having great results. There's all kinds of studies about it having great results, but there's no money in it and there's certainly no power in it. Mm-hmm. And the vaccine is about power. Just as the election is about power. Why would you look at the gymnastics they've gone through to alter the outcome of this election? Mm-hmm. Well, look at the gymnastics they've gone through to push the whole pandemic narrative. So there's I think it's very, very close. It's very, very, they're commensurate. They're complementary. Well, it's the same people pulling the same strings. And look, there's a lot of power at stake. And I think Donald Trump, for all his flaws as a human being, I certainly have mine. I think he threatens that status quo. And, I find it just a bit rich for folks who have, a religious, and particularly a Christian belief system, or say they do. Well, I could never vote for a guy like Donald Trump. And I said, well, great. You won't vote for King David either. You wouldn't vote for Moses. You wouldn't vote for, you just took out all of God's best guys, right? Yeah. So that whole narrative, and it is a narrative. It's not the truth. It's a narrative.
Yep.
And right. And we're not interested in truth. We're interested in narratives. Because that makes us feel good.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't even make us feel good at this point. It destroys us. Perfect example. What happened over Thanksgiving? What was it? New Mexico? They shut down pretty much every single big box store until after the holiday. So if you wanted to cook, you couldn't. It was just amazing how it just ratcheted down so no one can be with their family. Now they're trying to push it out to Christmas. It seems like it's punishing people for voting against them, in my opinion. They're just mad, and so they're going to take it out on us. But I think we're finally, the people have more power everywhere than those that rule us, and we need to actually take our power back. And maybe this is the push for us to do that.
Well, it might be. I know that the digital dollar was supposed to debut January 1. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it will still do that. I still think the jury's out. I suppose all puns intended on whether the election is overturned or righted, I should say. It's overturned now. It should be righted. But yeah, this is a symptom of our times. I say when it makes us feel good, I mean the folks that are, some people are looking for that vaccine. Some people want to be taken care of. They want their PPP.
That's fine. You know what?
They want all that stuff, right?
I got to tell you, James, I don't have a problem with that. My problem is you need to do it too. And if you don't do it, you're a Nazi and you want to kill people, and therefore we will force you to do it. That's where I draw the line, because you can be fearful. You can live in your home. Go for it. Put a mask on 24/7. But to take away everybody else's freedom to make yourself feel good when there's no real science behind it, there's no thought, it's all emotion like you described, that's when society starts to fall apart, don't you think? And
well, yes, that's behind I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, actually, I'm going to take the last break and let you think about that and answer when we come back on the other side. We're taking our last break. You're living in the solution. Welcome back to Living the Solution. We're speaking with Mr. James Gorrie. Again, he's an author. He has a podcast. He writes for Epoch Times, and he's an excellent thinker, I think. And I'm sorry I cut you off before the break because I wanted to get your take on what we just talked about.
The problem with having half the population, which I think half the population doesn't pay taxes, but the problem with having a divided country as to the nature of our country and as to what our country is and or ought to be, that becomes a problem from a governmental standpoint. When you shift from a representative republic to a straight democracy, which is what the left is trying to do. And so, they want to eliminate the electoral college. They want to expand the Supreme Court, impact the court, obviously, and add, some other states or other territories and as states and so forth. So when we say, well, I don't have a problem with someone wants to mask me, I don't have a problem with either, but I do have a problem with the political calculus that comes along with that. Mm-hmm. And so to have half our country in that mode of thought and leaning in that direction, it's crazy and it's dangerous, and we do risk losing our republic. And I just find it absurd that we get to this point. But again, they paint it in morality. It's like, it's, well, we're doing this for you. So it lets you, it lets quote unquote us, the little people, feel good about ourselves, and it lets tyrants feel good about themselves as well. They're doing something that's right and that's good and moral, even though nothing could be further from the truth.
Absolutely. And I listened to I think it was the Michigan legislature, one of the people who run the elections, she's been there for like 30 years, spoke up at the hearing, and I really didn't think about this in this terms. But this whole movement towards every vote should count, no vote should be removed because of voter suppression, it actually suppresses the black vote more than any other vote in the country, because that's where a lot of the graft goes on in these ballot stuffing. I'm sure my vote got nullified in the election because I looked on the website and someone had applied for an absentee ballot and sent it in the same day they applied for it before the election. I mean, really? So
yeah.
I'm just so pissed about it. I got to tell you, but what's the point of being a citizen? I don't care what color you are. If somebody can come in and water down your vote, have ballots come in from out of the country, it's just so overwhelmingly ridiculous. And these people are still saying nothing to see here. It didn't overturn it's just laughable. But as an American citizen, we all should be outraged that they're getting away with it. Or I don't think they will, but the fact that they tried to, and I think it's been going on forever. But again, you're right. These moral pronouncements, the black people are being disenfranchised. We know it's best. We're going to come and help you. But in actuality, they're watering down your vote even more. We need to start thinking outside the box. And I actually disagree with you. I don't think these guys are half the country. I think they're a small minority with the media in their pocket, and the people in power have been, bought off, or they actually have been Manchurian candidates up in there. But I don't think they're the majority. That's why I think it was a landslide, quite frankly, in the election. Black, white, green did not want this.
Well, I certainly hope you're right. I would be happy to stand corrected on whether it's a majority. It's certainly a substantial portion of the country.
I just think they're loud. They're really loud and obnoxious. And they depend on everybody to be quiet and take it.
Well, and they have the media, and it's interesting. The reveal at Fox News has been stunning. Mm-hmm. Just amazing. And I think it's people are looking for news elsewhere. That's why you're doing what you're doing, I presume, at some level, and why I'm doing what I'm doing with my site. I wrote a piece for the Epoch Times maybe 6 months ago, and in that piece, I talked about the vice premier of China saying, look, Trump cannot be permitted to win the election. And we're going to use everything we can, our political, our financial, our media ties, our business ties to defeat him. And all of that started to come out in terms of, where Dominion got their money. They're funded through a Swiss bank owned by China, and where some of the votes were counted in China and other places such as, what was it, Venezuela or Germany. So there's, we ought to ask ourselves, every one of us, what's happened to our country when we're sending votes out to foreign nations who want nothing but to overcome us? Why are we sending that out? Why are we ignoring these affidavits from hundreds, if not thousands, of people nationwide, seeing this voter fraud and these ballots being shipped or trucked from New York to Pennsylvania and run through scanners dozens of times and all these types of things? I have friends who are liberal, and they see nothing wrong with what's happened. They're thrilled.
Are they aware of all these other evidence it's been tainted? Are they aware, or they just don't care?
They don't believe it.
They don't believe it. Wow.
They don't believe it.
All these guys put themselves at risk, and some of them being assaulted, to tell them what they were there watching it or doing it themselves. They just think that's not true.
Yes.
Wow. It's amazing.
Yes. No, it's crazy because, on the one hand, Trump's an evil guy. I'm paraphrasing here from their position, and he'll do anything to stay in power. And all he cares about is money. Well, he's lost a couple of billion in his net worth since he took the job, and there's simply no acknowledgement. It's pathological at some level, I think, and to some degree. It's just, again, it's an emotional triggering thought that just can't get them there. Just can't.
It's amazing. The brain is a very powerful organ, isn't it? Because, and it's the opposite side. All of the money that's, you start off not a pauper, but you're certainly not a multimillionaire, and you come out of your vice presidency and various Congress folks come in with, regular bank accounts, and they come out super rich. Even here in Georgia, that's happening. Nobody thinks that's weird.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, think about it. The Communist Party members in China, they're all millionaires or billionaires. Mm-hmm. One of the richest guys on earth is Putin, Vladimir Putin. He's worth over $1 trillion. Wow. Somebody once said in just countries, the rich become powerful, and in corrupt countries, the powerful become rich. And that's what we're seeing with Biden and with all these people, all these folks. And money corrupts. And, it just does. And there's no way around it. And, some people are immune to it. I think Reagan was immune to it. I think Carter was immune to it. I disagree vehemently with Carter on most things, but I don't think he was out there to line his pockets. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Clinton, well, I think we know the answer.
We don't have to talk about that one. That's we got you.
Yeah. No, so that's where it is, and so all these different things, whether it's the imposition of a digital dollar or universal basic income, which I think the PPP was kind of a dry run, and the other hand of that, the other side of that would be the modern monetary theory. We can print as much money as you want without any debasement of the currency.
Is that even economically a thing? Could you even do that? Doesn't sound like that's an economic tenet that's sustainable or that's real. Put it that way.
It's real until it doesn't work.
Okay.
Well, look, there's a reason the dollar is what it is. It's backed by the world's strongest economy, but it's also backed by the world's strongest military. And when people would say to me, I've been discussing this with other people, maybe they say, oh, well, I think the U.S. should sit back and, we don't need to be the world's policeman. And I said, that's what we signed up for. Oh, we did? Yes, we did. Well, it shouldn't happen. Okay, well, great. who do you think ought to be the world's policeman? Do you want Russia to run the world? Do you want China to run the world? Do you want Iran to run the world? Who do you want to live under?
That's
Dead
easy.
silence.
Yeah, I bet. Reality
Right?
check.
Reality check. Then you have global hegemons, which is a political science term, but the hegemon is the over superpower as a day. And at one time it was the British Empire, and then we had a war, two wars to sort that out, and it became the U.S. Germany was making a play for it. China's making a play for it now. That's where we are. So people are being told the wrong story of the U.S. Whether it's slavery or whether it's sure there's slavery everywhere.
Exactly.
I'm not discounting it, but it's kind of a part of the human condition, as it were. I hate to say that, but it just is everywhere. And today, I was listening to a fellow talk about it, and slavery was Africa eastward much longer than it was Africa westward. It was Africa eastward, north and eastward before the New World, and after the New World adopted it and abolished it. And what do we have today is human trafficking. Is that not slavery?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Young girls, young boys, mainly. I think it's horrendous.
That's a whole other conversation, frankly. It
is, but it's also it's all about kind of there's a thread, a through line through that, and that's the morality of a society. What's allowed, right? What's protected? What's promulgated? What's promoted? Modern monetary theory says, we can print as much money as we can, and to no one's detriment. At some point, people start wanting to hold money that and that they're never going to get back, or hold bonds, buy bonds that they're never going to get paid their principal on. Okay, or if they do, since the Fed came into existence, the value of the dollar has shrunk by about 95, 96%, something like that. So a tremendous amounts of damage done to our national currency and so forth. So whether it's UBI or modern monetary theory, it can work until it doesn't. And it's old fashioned. I know this, but money used to be it's a store of value, and value was created by labor or effort or energy. And so when you create trillions of dollars out of thin air over long periods of time, in a sense, you're depleting, you're devaluing, debasing human life, human energy, human effort. Are you not?
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
And that's immoral. And, I don't want to get too philosophical or eschatological here, but in the main, God has a problem with that. So there is always going to be a reckoning, and we may be seeing it today, or we may be on, in the beginning of it with what's going on in our inner cities, what's going on in the election, what's going on in the economy. This all may be a reckoning that the folks who are kind of orchestrating this may not have taken into account. We'll see.
Well, we definitely will see, but time goes so quickly. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And as long as you're out there doing what you do, people have something that they can hang on to. I think as long as we don't fall into this and have despair, because there is hope, and we are that hope, I think. Thank you for everything you do. And how can people reach you and read your work?
Well, they can read my work at the Epoch Times starting in January. The bananarepublican.com will be up again. It's up now, but will be refreshed. We've got a new set of folks working with us, and it's going to be back up with all kinds of cultural, political ideas and thoughts and articles and so forth. So that's at bananarepublican.com. And there's you can reach me there. So those are two ways you can read what I do. And I really want to thank you for having me, Dr. George. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much. I look forward to having you back on. And thank you, everybody, for living in the solution.
Revolutionary Talk for Revolutionary Times. Liberty Talk FM.